Hey, good evening, everybody. It's John with the Missouri Liberty Report, but you already knew that because you're normally here every single week. And good on you for that. I appreciate it. So, tonight, as it says in the description, I have Darin Chappell with me. He's from District 137 here, newly elected state rep. So, be ready for a good conversation, lots of good information, and then, of course, your questions that you may have for him. So give me uno momento, and I will start the recording, and we'll take off, okay?
In the restaurant of life, we're putting freedom back on the menu. It's the Missouri Liberty Report with John Williams, working with grassroots organizations and legislatures to make Missouri the freest state in the nation. Let freedom ring.
All right, folks, and we're back with another edition where freedom lovers come and we all hang out and talk, and chat, converse, ask questions, have great dialogue. It's the Missouri Liberty Report. And with me tonight, I'm very happy to have, by recommendation of a good friend, Tom Martz. His name is Darin Chappell. He is out of District 137 right here in the state of Missouri, newly elected state rep. And again, highly recommended by Tom, so that bodes well already, doesn't it? Well, Mr. Chappell, how are you doing this evening, sir?
Well, I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tom said, hey, here's somebody that I think you should have on and interview. So, I trust Tom. Tom's Tom's not some weirdo sitting in a dark corner trying to tell me what to do. So I took his word. And so I guess to start off the show, if you'll tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you chose to run for Missouri House of Representatives.
Yeah, sure. So I taught political science at Missouri State. I was the only conservative in there, but I taught political science and I taught public budgeting and finance at the graduate level. At the undergrad level, I taught American government, and I specifically focused on federalism and our foundational documents. And so I taught that from a conservative perspective, which means I actually taught what they said and not twisted them into some modernistic view of how it ought to be, but what the founders actually said and what they meant when they said it. After that, I was a city manager, and I managed Seymour and Bolivar, and I retired last year in Chillicothe. My time as a city manager, I tried to run government from a conservative perspective. Good government is difficult. Bad government happens by accident all the time. But I really tried to make sure that we didn't violate anybody's liberties, that we utilized the tax dollars that they entrusted us with to the best of our abilities, and to do so in a fiscally responsible way. And because of that, in my entire career, I never once had a budget in the red, and I never advocated for a tax increase in any of the cities that I served. So when Roy Blunt retired and announced his retirement, and Billy Long then decided to run for Congress, and Eric Burleson, or for the Senate rather, and then Eric Burleson decided to run for Congress, and so the dominoes fell, and so I decided I was going to run for state rep down here in the Springfield area because that's where I'm actually from. And when redistricting occurred, they drew the 137th, which is actually the part of Greene County that I'm from. My family moved to the Rogersville Turner Station area just east of Springfield in 1836. And my grandchildren are actually the 9th generation of my family to live in this district. So I decided to run here, and I was victorious in my primary race, and then I was unopposed in my general. And so I was sworn in on January 4th, and everything's been going great since.
Well, first of all, how dare you be involved in government and try to, make sure that people's tax dollars don't get wasted. I mean, what's wrong with you? I mean, that's just not normal, Mr. Chappell.
You know,
We don't do that anymore. They let money just flow through their hands like water. What's this saving money and no tax I mean, what are you speaking Babylonian to me right now? Because I don't understand.
right. Yeah, I'm sure there are other city managers out there who can say the same thing about their career, but I've never met one of them. The reality of it is that the vast majority of municipal and county governments, they're always looking for another tax revenue stream. And the answer for budget crises is more taxes. It's never a reduction or looking for waste. And I just never saw it that way. Every year I would approach the budget and I'd say, okay, we're going to cut 5%. Because I don't think there's a government on the planet that can't cut 5% just from waste, fraud, and abuse, if nothing else. And so we'd cut 5%, and my department heads would groan about that. And then the next year, they realized we could do it, and so I'd say, okay, that was great. Now let's cut another 5%. And so I tried to cut expenses every year, and irrespective of whether taxes went up or not, that didn't matter, because we would have reserves. And my goal was always, if we could get the reserves built up and get government lean enough, then I was always pushing for a reduction in the taxes that we collected.
You're talking all this, and next thing you're going to say you actually follow the Constitution and other weird stuff like that. I'm sure you'll say that at some point, like some kind of you're from a different planet, just about. I mean, I shouldn't say that, because we do have some good reps, and we do have some good senators who, for the most part, follow the Constitution. So I shouldn't act like they don't exist. They're few and far between, and that is the problem at hand. So you're speaking of money. Now, I didn't get a chance to read the article, but someone posted on a page on Facebook that the governor wants to add like another $2.5 billion. He wants what is it? The budget was going to be $49 billion. He wanted $52 billion or something like that. He wanted to. I don't know. I haven't seen anything else on it. It popped up, and it slipped by me, and I didn't find it back. Somebody posted the governor's wanting a bigger budget. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, I don't know that we've got the total numbers calculated entirely. I know the governor's State of the Union or State of the State address. There were a lot of things that he said that he wanted. Let me just be upfront with everybody. The governor is a friend of mine. I've known him for more than 20 years. He and my dad were friends. I was the city manager there in Bolivar, and that's where he's from. I remember when he was sheriff, and in fact, when he first ran for state representative, a friend of mine was also running, and I served as campaign manager for the guy that ran against our then future governor. So I've known him for a long time, and he's not as conservative as I am. But I just want to be clear. I think the governor has good intentions, and I think he's got a good heart. I think some of his department heads are not as fiscally responsible as they need to be, and so when he says, "Okay, what do we need in order to get the job done?" they give him those numbers, and then he put them in the State of the State. That's not to take away from his responsibility. He's the governor. But if you had asked him, Governor, do you want to increase the size of the budget by 4%? I'm pretty sure he would have said no.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but the thing that drives me nuts, once in a while, there's a lot of good intentions, but things are done with intent instead of looking at the outcome, and that's what bothers me when it comes to whether it's a law being written or a budget, something to that effect. There's always this good intent, but people, a lot of them fail to, actually calculate the outcome, and that's what I'm concerned with. If somebody says, well, it's just like the certificate of need we have in the state of Missouri. That was supposed to, reduce health care costs, and it's done nothing of the like. Now, that could have been because they wanted control over health care, or some people actually thought they could make health care more accessible for the poor and bring the cost down. And that intent behind that law, well, it did nothing. I mean, they're saying they're saying that we're probably short on an estimate by 7,700 beds, lacking so many CT machines, MRI machines, and I'm thinking, who in their right mind thinks that reducing the amount of those things, hospital beds and CT scanners and MRI machines, how that would ever have a good outcome? And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
Oh, no, you're fine. Go ahead.
So, anybody that understands basic economic principles knows that when you reduce supply and not demand, because, we still have roughly 6 million people in the state of Missouri. So when you reduce supply, you, by definition, are going to increase costs simply because of basic supply and demand principles. But then there are other facets to that we don't commonly link together. But part of the reason why so many communities were freaking out about COVID-19, especially in the beginning of 20, was because of the limited supply of hospital beds. And so many of the infringements on liberty of individuals in these communities was done because hospitals came to cities and counties and said, we don't have the staff, we don't have the beds, and you have to help us reduce this so that we're not just completely overrun with people choking to death on their own phlegm in the parking lot of a hospital because we can't get them in. The whole thing about government and community and how it is that all the pieces interlock and interact with one another, it's like a spider web. You pull on one strand and the whole thing shakes.
Yeah, I mean, and I get where you're coming from on that. And don't even get me started on the whole COVID thing, because we'll go on forever on that one subject, and I feel like I've spoken on it enough. Even though, since you brought it up, I want to get your take on how cities and counties in this state, and in this state alone, not to mention across the country, the lockdowns, the shutdowns, everything else that went on. What is your take on the response and, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, the complete overreach of government on telling businesses that they couldn't operate or operate at a certain percentage, 25% capacity, all these things. What is your opinion on how the counties and some of these cities overstep their bounds?
Well, okay, so the short version is it was absolutely outrageous and in many instances flatly unconstitutional. All right, so that out of the way, let me give you a little bit of what happened in my community, which at the time was Chillicothe. So we had a meeting with the health department and all the local government officials from the communities round about us and the county officials, and we had a representative from the CDC, and they came to us in late January or early February of 20. And this is before anybody really knew anything at all. And so they were telling us that this thing had an R naught of somewhere around 3 to 3.5, which is, extraordinarily viral. I mean, that when you have an R naught factor that high, you expect people to become infected at a very high rate. And they were telling us that individuals were going to be succumbing to the disease. And they actually told us that we needed to prepare to have temporary mortuaries put in place because the local funeral homes would not be able to keep up with the demand and wouldn't have places to store the bodies before they could be buried. So when you're a public official and you're told things like that, the weight of being responsible for the welfare of the community weighs down on you immediately. And I fully admit I was shook by what they told me, and I was concerned about the possibility that what we were looking at was potentially another Spanish flu type thing where we were going to lose significant percentages of people. But very shortly thereafter, and I mean very shortly, just in a matter of weeks, it began to be apparent that they were overblowing it. They didn't have the data to back up their predictions. There was just simply no evidence. There were a lot of people who were infected. We did see a high infection rate, but we weren't seeing the resulting mortality that they had predicted. And so in my community, other than when the governor shut everything down for 2 weeks, and he was fed the same information. So, I mean, he shut it down for 2 weeks. And of course, it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And here we are, what is it now? 32 months to flatten the curve. So, in the very beginning, when he shut it down for 2 weeks, we, like everybody else, followed along with that. But other than that, my community, we never shut down. My city, we never imposed a mask mandate, ever. The county health department did for about 3.5 weeks. And after we'd been a week or two, I guess, we had no new cases. I went to the health director and I said, just how far below zero do you intend to push this? And so then they took the mask mandate off. But my city, we never shut down. Now, that's not because they didn't want to. The mayor in the community is a fairly ardent Democrat, and she was buying it all hook, line, and sinker. And they were pushing hard for me to shut the city down, and I just absolutely refused. I would not do it. And the council had the final decision, but every time it got brought up, I threw a fit. And there was a time in the courthouse there in Livingston County when we were having a meeting, and the county coroner came in, and he said, this is so stupid. If we were looking at any farm and you brought in new cows, we'd segregate them until we knew they were virus free. And I said, well, yeah, but we're not cows. If a veterinarian was in charge, we'd all have cones on, I guess, but we're not, we're people, and we have rights and we have liberties, and we're simply not going to step on everybody's rights and liberties. And people ought to decide for themselves whether or not they're going to take the shot, whether or not they're going to have a mask, whether or not they're going to stay in their home. That's up to them. And liberty has consequences, but they have their liberties, and we're not going to take that away. So we never did shut down. That summer of 20, Chillicothe has an aquatic center, and it's entirely outside, and it's kind of a big deal for that community. And I decided to open it just like every other summer. And you'd have thought that I'd sacrificed somebody's child on the courthouse steps when I did that. And the health director came to me and I said, they're outside in the sun, dipped in chlorine. If that's not good enough, we're all going to die, and they might as well have a good time before we do. And so we opened it up, and of course there were no problems whatsoever. But the fascinating part of it was, because we didn't shut down and everybody around us did, the city of Chillicothe had the biggest year in tax revenue from sales taxes that had ever been on record. So when other cities were falling behind 10, 15%, we were up 20% year over year in 2020 because we did not shut down. And then in 21, I thought, well, it'll level off. We were up another 18% when I retired, because when people had come to Chillicothe from the surrounding area and they saw what we had to offer, they came back. Even when their community opened up, they came back. So not only was it an overreach and a ridiculous knee-jerk reaction, although I understand why initially because of what CDC told us all, but not only was it a ridiculous overreach and the trampling of liberties, but all those cities that then wanted to go and beg and borrow and plead for ARPA funds and new taxes to be able to pay for services, they did it to themselves, because Chillicothe was and continues to be in terrific financial condition because we just didn't shut down.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson. I think another lesson to take away, because, they're still pushing this COVID crap. I mean, every once in a while, somebody will come out of the woodwork and, oh, there's another variant. Everyone's going to die. People in China. It's like you're going to wear it out. And then what's going to happen is someday, because it's, viruses do mutate on their own, we could have who knows how far down the road, we could actually have something that's actually serious come out. And it's just like when they blow the tornado sirens around here when a storm's 20 miles away. You keep doing that and people just stop paying attention. And then a tornado actually comes and then you got problems because you can't, And so with the whole thing with COVID, if there would ever be a serious illness that would come through, some kind of virus or something, and you keep pushing this spear porn, people, after a while, people are going to become immune to it. They're not going to listen to you anymore. And rightfully so, because you were throwing it in their face day after week after month after year. And after a certain point, the population is going to be like, listen, we get it. There's a COVID virus out here, but we would like to live our lives like normal human beings. So stuff it. And
exactly. Exactly. But it's interesting you mentioned tornado sirens, because when I was the city manager in Seymour, which is a tiny little population town, and it's surrounded by Amish community. And so we had a tornado siren that went out in the town, and these were Korean War surplus air raid sirens is what they were. But to replace one was going to be something like, it's been a while, but I think it was like $60,000. And this was a small town. That's a lot of money. And so I got to dealing with a company that had weather alert radios. And so what we did was we just shut down the tornado sirens in town rather than replace them. And we bought everybody in town a weather alert radio and showed them how to use it and said, listen, you kind of need to be responsible for yourself. There's too many situations where there's human error, even with a tornado siren. Furthermore, they were never designed to wake you up inside your house from a dead sleep. They were always designed to warn you if you were outside and the enemy was about to put a strafing run on us. So rather than replace that system with an equally ineffective system, we just saved just a ton of money and gave everybody the ability to take care of themselves. And I had somebody say, well, aren't you afraid of the consequences of not having a tornado siren? And I said, the Amish community that's right outside city limits, what do? I mean, they're self-reliant. Tornadoes hit them as frequently as they do us. Here's what they do. It starts storming. They go outside and see if the skies turn green or something or another, and then they go, Shazam, we ought to go to the cellar. And they don't wait on government to give them a warning. So it's not just the money that's spent, and it's not just the liberties that are trampled in the immediate reaction. We're training an entire population of our country to become reliant on government, just for the most basic aspects of human existence. And government screws stuff up all the time. Best intentions set aside, government makes terrible mistakes. And if you're relying on government to save you in a crisis situation, you're already messed up. Because all we do in government really well is we show up and put yellow tape around the crime scene. But we can't stop it from happening.
Yeah. A friend of mine has a quote that I really like. And her quote is, everything government touches turns to crap. And I really do love that quote because it seems appropriate all the time. So let me let's go in a different direction here. I do have someone here that says, so he's gotten into hemp farming, and there's concern that the Department of Health and Senior Services is going to start trampling because of Amendment 3 passing, that DHSS is going to start screwing with the people who may grow hemp for the oils or whatever they use them for. What would your response be to that? Because I feel in this state, we need to work on just saying, you know what, if you want to grow hemp, you can grow hemp because of the many uses of hemp, not just for medicinal, but I mean, literally, you can make bottles, concrete, feed your livestock with a cake, all this stuff, and even biodiesel. So you could become the state could become maybe a little more energy independent. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I think hemp is a time tested and time honored product that we've produced here in the United States from the very beginning. Um, as I understand it, and this is out of my particular area, so I'm a numbers guy first and foremost. But as I understand it, the national government has made hemp legal, and the difficulty with that is how hard it is to distinguish between hemp and marijuana chemically. I know THC, but then the levels and all that, and being able to distinguish between the two. So because of that, I think the concern may be valid that Department of Health and Senior Services may try to step over onto the hemp side, but they don't have the backing of the national government. So because the national government says hemp is legitimate and legal. The hypocrisy of saying one is legitimate and legal and the other one isn't is a whole other issue. But the fact of the matter is that hemp has far too many uses and applications for it to just be discarded.
Yeah, and again, A3 passing really broke a lot of our hearts, and that's going to lead me into another topic here shortly. But what you said, it's hard to distinguish them. But if I'm of the mind that I don't want to tell someone else what they can or cannot put into their bodies. Now, there's one thing added to that. If we're gonna prescribe to that method, then I also prescribe to the method that I don't want government programs to take care of people who may have a different type of drug issue. I would assume open that up, have less regulation, and have more churches and nonprofits step in to help these people instead of government thinking they have to take control of everything and subsidize it and spend a lot of taxpayer money on something that's really you're talking hemp and marijuana, really no harm.
Yeah.
So I know it's one of these touchy subjects. Before the primary started in 2022, I interviewed 3 or 4 supposedly very conservative people. And we could see eye to eye on so many things, but the minute I brought up recreational marijuana legalization, I lost them. They were like, "Nope, I've seen, what," and they almost all had the same answer. That's what bugged me.
Yeah.
I've seen drugs tear, families apart. I'm like, pot? Like I know heroin, crack, methamphetamine, even alcohol. Yes, tears families apart. I'm not, and I've known several people, including myself, that used to smoke it recreationally quite often, and I don't anymore, but I used to. I never saw anybody's family being torn apart by weed. I think now I'm not saying it's never happened. I'm just saying the likelihood is way down compared to the other harsh drugs that are out there that truly are addictive and can decimate a person.
Yeah.
It bugs me because we, at times, people, you get people talking about freedom, and I think people neglect to think about freedom on the whole spectrum, which means you are responsible for your own actions, and that includes whatever you put into your body. That's on you. If nobody's holding a gun to your head to use that whatever it is substance, you're accountable. And it seems like on that part of the human, in that part of society, that just gets thrown out of the mix in freedom. I'm like, no, if we're talking freedom, we're talking across the whole spectrum. It's not just you can own a gun, you have lower taxes, all this stuff. It's also you have the choice what you're going to put into your body.
Absolutely. So again, full disclosure, I'm a child of the '70s. So yeah, I've certainly partaken in my past as well. I don't smoke anymore, and haven't for a long, long time. I'm also a minister and have been for 30 years. So I don't want to smoke pot, and I don't want my kids or my grandchildren to smoke pot. But as a city manager, I oversaw police departments in every single city, and I read the police reports. And I'll tell you, I've never seen a report where somebody rolled a big fatty and then beat their wife and kids up. But I saw that almost every week from alcohol. The only thing that anybody ever put in danger smoking weed was a bag of Doritos, and the idea that again, it's the hypocrisy that I can't stand. I'm not an advocate for weed. You're never going to see me file a bill on recreational marijuana. I'm not going to do that. But the idea that we completely normalize the alcoholism that does rip families apart, that does cause domestic abuse and child neglect, and then throw an absolute fit over weed. To me, that's a hypocritical position. Now, I'm not advocating for prohibition. Don't misunderstand. But the only thing prohibition did for this country, it created organized crime and NASCAR, and that's really it. That's all we got out of that. People are going to do what people are going to do. But when government feels like it has all of the answers and all we need to make people be right, quote unquote, is another law, that's how we end up with things like Amendment 3, which was 39 pages, single spaced, of all kinds of garbage that had nothing to do with recreational marijuana. But because of the way it was advertised and the way individuals saw it, they just thought, well, now I can finally smoke my weed and not have to worry about it. And they unfortunately bought a whole lot more than they bargained for.
Yeah, that was highly disappointing to see. Again, I understand why people did it, because they felt the legislature wasn't doing anything, and they thought this was their only chance. And it's like, no, it's one of those issues. It wasn't going to get resolved quickly. We just needed more patience. Because at some point the feds could say, all right, we're removing weed from the drug schedule, and we're just done with it. And then everything's, the feds may move on it before the state would. But people got impatient, and I understand. But it's like, man, you guys bought a whole lot more than what you thought you did. And, I spent a lot of time trying to explain to people, I know this sounds good, but have you read all 39 pages? Do you really know what you're getting in there? But again, and this is going to lead us into another topic, because of the way, the ease in which the Constitution can be changed in the state of Missouri, and with the vote threshold that we had at the time of A3, it passed, because, I think only 13 counties actually passed it. There was 13 counties passed that amendment to the Constitution. So I ask you, Mr. Chappell, what are your thoughts if you were going to fix the issue on how easy it is to change the Constitution by initiative petition, a ballot initiative? How would you do that? Now, would you say, okay, I just want to increase the amount of votes it takes to pass an amendment, or would you do more than that?
Well, okay, so first, that's like the third time you've called me Mr. Chappell, and that was my dad. So Darin, please.
Okay.
Yeah. So makes me nervous when somebody calls me Mr. Chappell.
I do that. I was taught manners as a young man, and I always try to be polite. I apologize.
No, I appreciate it, but I just want you to know I'm not that guy. There are a lot of people like that in Jeff City, but I'm not one of them. The initiative petition, of course, has two sides. so there's the statutory initiative petition, and I'm absolutely 110% in favor of that and in favor of it staying exactly the way that it is. I think the voice of the people needs to be able to be heard, and if the legislature or the governor refuses to acquiesce to the will of the people, there needs to be a way for them to be able to have their voice heard in a statutorily important way. So on the statutory side, I'm leave it exactly the way that it is. But the Constitution for the state of Missouri is a different issue, and here's why. It's not because I don't want the people to be heard, but the Constitution ought to be difficult to alter. The Constitution is not supposed to be a secondary set of laws in addition to the RSMO. The RSMO has all of our laws that have been passed over the years, and it's a very, very thick book of laws from the beginning. And some of them have been overturned by the courts. Some of them have been replaced by newer, more updated versions. And that's a continuing river of thought through our state's history. The Constitution, however, is supposed to be a very finite set of parameters that keeps government in check against the will of the people, so that government cannot become tyrannical. That's what it's for. And so anything that we're going to change in the Constitution, it needs to be something that our society has evolved in such a way that government has to be checked against this massive change in our societal structure. And that just doesn't happen very often at all. The Constitution has been amended multiple times. The last time was in 1945, where we just rewrote the Constitution, and that's the version we're still under. But because of initiative petition, we have things in there that have no business being in the Constitution. They ought to be laws. So when you're talking about the friends that you were talking to and they were impatient, let's say the national government does decriminalize pot. So they need to understand that is not a free-for-all at that point, because they changed the Constitution. And so in the Constitution for the state of Missouri, there are criminal levels of having marijuana. You can't have just truckloads of it and be okay. And if and when the national government does decriminalize it, that's still going to be in our Constitution. And there will still be state charges available for individuals, even if not national ones. And the legislature will not be able to alter or change that because you put it in the Constitution. And so you get to throw the pebble into the pond. You do not get to control where the ripples go. And for so much of this IP reform talk, it's trying to make people understand and recognize that the Constitution is not simply a rule book and we can just change it at whim. It ought to be difficult. So all that having been said, let me answer your actual question. I've heard a lot of talk about raising the number of signatures required. I think that's a bad idea, because getting signatures is simply a matter of spending money, hiring college students and others to be able to go out and get signatures. If you increase the number of signatures required, all you're doing is making it easier for the wealthiest individuals to have their way and inviting out-of-state money to come in and pervert our system of government because they want to be able to do something that they currently can't do easily. So you take the power out of the hands of the people and you put it into the hands of those with larger sums of money at their disposal. I've heard the idea of raising the number of votes possible. I think that has merit because we see in the pattern of the national Constitution that Congress passes an amendment, and then it has to go to the states, and the states have to ratify that by 75%. 75% of the states have to ratify that in order for it to become an amendment to the Constitution. Well, that's a very high number. That's a high number of states, and those are state legislatures that have to sign on to that before it can become a part of the Constitution. And that's why our national Constitution, since 1789 has been amended only 27 times, and 10 of those were all done at once in 1791. So we see the difference in that, but it's designed to be that way because the Constitution is extraordinarily important and it ought not be altered on a whim. We got national laws all over the place, but we don't have many changes to the Constitution. How high should the percentage be? I've heard 60, I've heard 65, 66. And those would be fine. The problem is because people don't understand the difference, I fear, between statutory IP and constitutional IP. I think people are going to say, you just don't want to hear us, and we're not going to support that. And so whatever we do has to pass a vote of the people. So the messaging is extraordinarily important. I hear an awful lot about concurrent majority as well. And a concurrent majority says that the IP issue would have to pass by a simple majority of the voters overall, but it would also have to pass in a majority of the counties in the state, or not the counties, the legislative districts. So we have 163 legislative districts, so it would have to have 50% plus one across the state, but then we'd also have to have it passed in 82 of the legislative districts across the state as well. That's also a high bar, and I think people might accept that a little easier. The only thing I would say about that is that's the House of Representatives. We are a concurrent majority because we all won our races in our individual legislative districts. And because the Republican Party has a supermajority, we've won our legislative races across a supermajority of those districts, and we represent the vast majority of voters across the state from a concurrent majority perspective. So it's a duplication of what we already have in the House of Representatives. And so the concurrent majority has a lot of supporters, and I'm not arguing with them or against them, but I want us to make sure we understand exactly what it is that we're asking for. It's a duplication of what already exists.
Yeah, I know that, there was a House Joint Resolution that got crammed through last year and filibustered to death in the Senate with some outstanding work by the Missouri Freedom Initiative. But that was going to, again, what they said was, this will keep the George Soros types out. This will keep the big money out. In reality, all that would have been able to get a ballot initiative done was the big money people, because they raised the signature threshold up so much that any grassroots that was trying to get a ballot initiative done couldn't have done it, because they're working with no money. They're just,
right.
They're volunteering their time to do something good for everybody in the state. And you'd have, again, Bloomberg and Soros and the like come in and just paying people to get signatures. That's what they did with A3. They paid people to get signatures, and those people had no idea. If you would ask, I'd say the vast majority of them, what was in the amendment, they couldn't have told you squat. They were earning a little pay to stand outside and collect signatures. So there was a lot of uninformed people, misinformed people that had no clue what they got themselves into. And that is unfortunate. But yes, it is too easy to change the Constitution. In my book, you raise the voter threshold, and that's it. But, again, there's going to be a lot of disagreement on that. A lot of folks, again, as you said, this is not a simple solution. Education is going to be key on this.
Yeah.
But, a lot of us fought tooth and nail to educate on A3. But now I don't live in St. Louis. I wasn't trying to drive up to St. Louis and educate people, because I was just told, don't waste your time. Advocates or people that were against A3 said, don't bother with it, because you don't go to Kansas City, you're not going to go to St. Louis, maybe Columbia, maybe Springfield, and get these people to vote no. It's just not going to happen, because in those areas, the money spent and the amount of, I would call it, propaganda out there, and the lack of trust in the legislature to get it done caused this, this storm that now, again, as you said, it's what we try to tell people. If the feds say, they decriminalize it and say, all right, we're not even, there's no more criminal punishment for marijuana. Yeah, everybody here in the state's going to be stuck. And we also tried to educate them that, hey, if you ever want to, get that amendment back off, say you want to undo the damage, good luck, because it's going to be even harder to do that than it was getting it done in the first place. So they made it so much harder on themselves, and unfortunately, they kind of only have themselves to blame because they wouldn't listen to reason. They were impatient and tired of waiting, and so
the last time we saw one of these just massive turnouts like this, and everybody believing they were voting for the right thing, was Proposition B. I want to say this would have been 08. I think that's right. It's either 08 or 10. And Prop B was the puppy mill bill. And everybody loves puppies. And nobody wanted to see dogs being mistreated. And everybody thought, well, we're going to vote for the puppy mill bill and it'll pass. And it did. It did. What they didn't understand, though, was that was an effort by PETA and the Humane Society of the United States, HSUS. And that bill, that proposition, actually would have required farm animals to be treated in specific ways as well. So if you had cattle and it got below a certain temperature, you were going to be mandated to have to bring them into a heated area and air conditioning during the summer, and all of these restrictions. So if you've got a dairy herd of 200 cattle, there's zero chance you could continue to have your business. And of course, that was the intent. Now, the reason why Prop B is something that most people don't know anything about anymore is because it was passed via IP, but it was a statutory passage. And once it got to the legislature and they saw all of the terrible ramifications, the legislature was able to say, no, we're not going to have this, and they repealed it. Well, the individual who did that, who stood up for liberty and fought back against HSUS and PETA, was none other than a representative by the name of Mike Parson. So I'm saying he's not a bad guy all the way through. I don't agree with him on everything, but he has stood up for liberty before, and that's just another example where, yeah, everybody's against puppy mills, but that's not what that legislation was about. And IP was used to try and get around the legislature by confusing and propagandizing the voters.
Yeah, I remember when the repeal happened, people were not happy campers, and at that time, I wasn't really super involved in politics, I guess you'd say. So I didn't have a complete understanding of what was going on. I knew there was an uproar for a short while afterwards. People were not thrilled. So, have you heard? I know this is a Senate bill, but have you heard about Bill Eigle's bill, SB 100, to make gold and silver legal money here in the state of Missouri? Have you heard about this bill?
No, I'm familiar of its existence, but I don't really know that much about it yet. It's just been introduced over to the Senate, and there's nothing in the House that I'm aware of that's been introduced as a companion bill yet.
Okay. Well, what would your thoughts be on making gold and silver legal money in the state of Missouri? What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, I would have no problem with that. The only issue I have with having our entire monetary system based on gold, as some people suggest ought to be, is that many of the nations who have the largest gold deposits on the face of the earth also happen to be severe enemies of ours. And Russia is one of them that has tremendous amounts of gold in their deposits. And if we were on the gold standard exclusively, It would not be hard for some of our enemies to just simply dig up the gold and introduce it to the market, which would cause us to have an inflationary efforts even on gold. I mean, we would suffer the consequences of inflation even though it's gold based. If you introduce more gold, it's the same thing as the Fed printing more money. I'd be much more comfortable if we had, if we were going to have a commodity based currency, if it was a combination of gold, silver, platinum, stuff like that, so that it was no one commodity was the basis, so that our enemies could not artificially cause our structure to fall apart.
Okay. But yeah, like I said, I think it's outstanding to give people a hedge against inflation with gold and silver, and all that happy noise, because the government is not going to stop wasting our money. So it's nice to have a choice whether you want your fiat dollars or you want to use gold and silver, that you have that choice. You could use either one. It's just now you have the option. And, there's even talk that if this bill would pass and the governor would sign it into law, there's even talk that maybe UPMA Bank, which is a bullion bank, would put a branch here in the state, which would be nice, because then you'd have something kind of local to you, where you could, get gold and silver bullion, and they'd even store it for you. So that would be extra snazzy. So real quick now, in about a little over 5 minutes, Darin, I'm gonna cut for one radio station and we can move on. Just so if we get in the middle of something and I cut you off, I'm not trying to be rude. I have to cut for a local station. Somebody's asking on HR 11, the House floor rules change. What were your thoughts on HR 11 when it hit the floor, and how the vote went down and everything else?
Sure. So HR 11 caused a big uproar, and there were some parts of HR 11 that I was opposed to. Just so you know, there were very few individuals that actually stood up and spoke out against HR 11. There was only one freshman that did, and that was me. I spoke out against one particular aspect where it had to do with proposing an amendment and timelines on that, and I explained why I was against it. And the leadership heard me, and when they went back into committee, that was the very first part of HR 11 that they took out. So everything that the liberty-minded individuals stood up and spoke about, they corrected for the most part. They altered some things, they took out some things. So when it really came down to it, they had the numbers to pass whether the liberty-minded individuals voted no or not. But we spoke with one another and we said, look, they heard us. They responded positively to what we told them. If we vote no on this now, when it really doesn't make any difference now that they've changed it, then it appears we negotiated in bad faith and they're never going to hear the liberty side again. So what we did was we got everything out that we could. We got the very best version we possibly could, and then we voted for it so that we would be able to live to fight another day.
Okay. Understood. It's just, as I get these reps on, then that's one of the questions that I'm going to be asking all of them is, what did you think about this? And, what was your response? Because we did go up to the Capitol on the 11th of January for Gold and Silver Day. But we did spend a little time talking to the freshmen, several of the freshman reps, and just kind of giving our thoughts on it, because it seemed like at the time they were just trying to consolidate power under one person, and it's like, no, that's enough we've had enough problems with the Speaker of the House, just literally letting the three most popular bills last session die on the calendar, not go anywhere. And I mean, he literally told one of the guys from the group that bill's never going to see the light of day. Just came right out and said it, and it's like, that's one of the three most popular bills. The amount of phone calls, emails on these bills is the highest volume And you're going to tell me that, tell just straight up, it's not going anywhere. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, okay. So that bothers us all. Why is
Sure.
one guy? I understand, I know that that you get 11, 12, 1,300 bills, proposed in a session. And I get you can't just sit there and try to get 1,300 bills to the floor for vote and all. But it still bugs the heck out of me that one guy's making the decision on, what goes to formal calendar, informal calendar, goes to committee, isn't going to see the light of day. That kind of bothers me too, that one guy's kind of, running the show as far as that goes. So that's one of those, I don't know. It ticked a lot of us off, just to put it bluntly. Okay, so I got about a minute left. So to those of you in the KEYK audience, thanks for joining me this week for this edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Next month, chock full of interviews again, because I've got several good interviews lined up. So Patrick Holland is on the 3rd. Grant Sundberg, another person from the Missouri Freedom Initiative, will be with us on the 10th. Epen Thampy on the 17th. And then Bill Eigels, L.A., is going to be joining me on the 24th. And then March, I've got March just about booked. Again, Patrick the first Friday, Maisie Boyd. I'm going to try to get Robert Brown back on with me on the 17th. We're going to have Representative Reich on March 24th. And then Tony Lavasco will be joining us on the 31st. So a lot of good interviews in the coming months. I hope you all join me every single week for those. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you next week. All right, now we can move on. I just wanted to fill a little bit of that space up to... a couple times I wasn't watching my clock, Darin, and then I looked down. I'm like, oh, I had 2 seconds left, and I just clipped right in the middle of somebody's statement. And I thought, boy, they're not going to like that very much. But that's what you get when you don't pay attention.
I hear you. One thing about what we were talking about, if I could just go back to that for
go
just
ahead.
a second. So there are some things in HR 11 and in our new rules, which did pass, that a lot of people got upset about. And one of them was the idea that previously the speaker would assign a bill to a committee, and then that committee passes it do pass, and then it would automatically go to a rules committee that was designated to catch all bills from that committee and a few other committees as well. And so you knew which rules committee was going to catch your bill if it got through the initial standing committee. And the new rules, the speaker puts it into a committee. It comes out of committee. It goes back to the speaker, and then the speaker assigns it to one of 3 rules committees. And a lot of people got upset because the speaker gets to touch it twice. And I totally understand that. But the way I see it is this. If the speaker wanted to kill your bill, and I don't even really care which set of rules you want to use going way, way back. If the speaker wants to kill your bill, the speaker can kill your bill any number of ways, not the least of which calling the chair of the committee and say, hey, kill this bill, because the chair is appointed by the speaker as well. So the speaker did not gain any power by doing it this way, although it looks like it, but he really doesn't have any more than he had last year or 10 years ago. But what that does is the speaker has told us all when the bill comes out of committee and it goes back to his desk, then he will call us, the sponsor of the bill. And he'll ask us, which of the 3 rules committees would you like your bill to be put into? So it gives us an opportunity to try and shepherd it into a rules committee that we think is favorable to that ideology behind the legislation. So that's a step we never had before. But even if that's not the way it works going down the road, I submit it's more of a transparency issue, because the speaker could just put your bill in a committee previously, just put your bill in a committee that he knows either is going to kill it at the committee level, or he knows that the rules committee that it's going to funnel into, it will definitely die there. Now, if the speaker doesn't refer it immediately to a rules committee, or if the speaker refers it to a rules committee that you didn't want it to go to, he can do that. He has that power, but now he's the one who did it. It wasn't the process. It wasn't the committee chairs. It wasn't the committee members. He himself is the one who did that. And so under this new system of rules, he hasn't really gained any power, but there is an increase in transparency. And so even though that's part of what HR 11 got people really upset about, to my mind, it was at worst a wash. And it's probably a better way for us to be able to hold the speaker accountable for certain pieces of legislation dying.
Okay. And that's what Tom's thought was last week, too, is it puts more onus on the speaker. But, again, as Tom kind of laid it out a little bit, which I can understand his point, too, some people are going to just use that as an excuse. Now, are you going to get rid of the excuse makers in government? Heck no. Those people are always going to exist for the most part. They're do-nothings, and they're there for whatever reason, but they're not there for the right reason. And so you're going to have that finger pointing, because that's what government, a lot of people in government do. They just point the finger and misdirect and misinform their constituents. Now, speaking of that, I had Representative Chris Sander on with me here a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how he would post his votes, or how he voted on legislation on his Facebook page. And they got very upset with him because he screenshotted from the House site, so you could go to the same page he did, see how everybody voted. He screenshotted that and said, hey, this is how I voted on this bill. And they said, okay, no more of that. Nobody, you can't post your votes like that on social media anymore. Or, I guess kind of the threat was you could be pulled from your committee chairs. What are your thoughts on something like that? Because I don't see the harm in it. If you're a representative, I would think you would want people to know exactly how you're voting. And it seemed like some people wanted to hide that. What do you think about all this?
Well, okay. First of all, how we vote is all public information anyway. You can go and see how everybody voted. It specifically tells how everybody voted. The issue, as I understand it, and I'm an incoming freshman, so all of this is before me, and I don't have any firsthand knowledge, so I'm a little leery of saying very much specifically because of that. But as I understand it, there were members who were screenshotting how other members voted as a way to attack that individual. So I may vote no on a bill for all kinds of reasons. Not just and it may not be because I fundamentally disagree with the philosophy behind the bill. It may just be poorly written. It may be written in such a way that it's unconstitutional, but if it were altered, it would be perfectly legitimate. And I'll vote no because I can't give up on my principles, which include being constitutionally loyal. And so for someone to take a screenshot, let's say there's a bill that says all babies should eat. But because of the way in which it's written, it's unconstitutional. And I vote no. And then somebody takes a screenshot and says Chappell's against feeding babies. Well, that's not a legitimate deal. But once it gets on Facebook or Twitter or some other social media crackhead site, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So I think what the leadership is wanting everybody to do is not flame on each other when there may be a perfectly legitimate reason why somebody voted yes or no on a thing. Now, it's also true that there are a lot of people who vote because the lobbyists got to them, or their biggest supporter back home got to them, or they just don't know what in the world they're talking about. That's also true that happens as well. I would feel a lot more strongly about it, and I know Chris does. Chris is a friend. I actually sit right behind him on the House floor. I sit next to Tony Lavasco, and Chris is right in front of me. They kind of put all of us liberty-minded people in the corner, which it's funny. There's a lot of funny stuff that happens. But anyway, I get where he's coming from, and I don't disagree with him. I mean, I think that's perfectly legitimate what he's saying. But I would feel much more harshly about it if those votes were not available to the public anyway.
Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, I understand somebody could say, without context, they're putting up your vote, and it's like, oh, like all babies must eat, and it's oh, he voted against all babies eating, but you also have the ability to respond via media outlets, newspapers, social media, and say the reason I voted no is because so-and-so neglected to say this was tucked in the bill, and why would I vote yes on this? So you have the ability to respond as well. And I know social media can be a cesspool, and good Lord, the things that you see on there, the stupid that seems to just surface on some sites is rather frightening.
Yeah.
But, so let me ask you this, because this is...
Well, hold on just real quick.
Sure.
Let me just say, you're 100% right. You can always come back and explain why you did what you did, and you can try to educate the voters that, no, you've misunderstood or you've been misinformed. But remember, these are the same people we all tried to warn against Amendment 3.
Well, you're right. You're right. I mean,
So,
you can only do so much, especially on social media.
And once the accusation is out there, it's next to impossible to get it all taken back in.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. So we had a bill last session, and I guess as Senator Brad's got a SB 43, there apparently needs to be a House version of it. This last year we tried to. They kind of named it Stand Your Ground Enhancement Act. We'd rather see it be called something like Innocent Until Proven Guilty Act, where if you defend yourself on your property, what have you, instead of you going in front of a jury trial and having to, you having to place self-defense in the trial, it would flip that to where you just went in front of a judge and they would have to try to prove that you committed murder and not self-defense. What do you think about a bill like that?
Absolutely. I think, the very basis of our judicial system is the premise that it's better for 10 guilty to go free than for one innocent to be imprisoned. And the presumption of innocence is a foundational bedrock of our entire concept of jurisprudence. And the idea that because you use a weapon to defend yourself, you're seen as anything other than innocent until evidence suggests otherwise is absolutely wrong and ought not be accepted. I would absolutely be in favor of that type of legislation being formulated. Now, again, the devil's in the details, and if somebody writes a bill that is named Innocent Until Proven Guilty, but it's a wretched bill that opens all kinds of trap doors that we don't want opened, I might have to vote no on that. But the basic principle that we're talking about, absolutely, I'd be in favor of that.
Okay, yeah. And I get it. Here's the thing. I have no problem with a rep who would vote no on a bill that sounds good, but is actually a crap bill, or there's been things stuffed into it that would horrify anyone with more than 2 brain cells to rub together. I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
The problem is when they take a bill and they try to stuff 10 other things into the same bill. That's what drives me nuts. It's like, can we just do one thing on one bill so everybody knows exactly what that bill is about? Not this bill is to, lower taxes, but then, 20 pages in, you find out they created some new program and you're going to end up losing taxpayer money on it anyway, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And speaking of money, what are your thoughts on basically half the state budget of Missouri being federal tax dollars? What do you think about that? That's awful.
Yeah, it is awful. And the money pouring in from the national government is one of the worst things that happens to a state. When I was in academia, I created a model of American federalism that dealt with this issue, and called finger trap federalism, and that's a whole nother program. But at any rate, what we've done is we've taken the money and allowed it to shape the way we view the role of government here at home. And I understand the argument that once Congress has said, here's how many billions of dollars we're going to give to the states, if Missouri says we're not taking our share, that doesn't mean that money goes back to the Fed. They just reallocate it to New York and California. And so the argument has been made that if Missouri takes it, we can use it in a way that not only benefits our citizens, but also use it in a way that is more constitutionally correct. And on the surface, okay, I understand the viewpoint, but it corrupts all of our departments. So they'll come to the House and they'll say, we need this allocation. Well, why do you need that allocation? Because we have to have it in order to get the federal money. Well, that's not a good enough reason to my mind, because you need to prove that the program or the expenditure is valid constitutionally and that it's valid for the state before we decide whether or not we're going to accept federal funding for it. And it's backwards in the mindset of many of the departments. And they see the allocation from the state as being necessary so they can get the federal money. They don't stop to ask, is this something we ought to be doing in the first place? And I'm not on the big budget committee. That's one of my few frustrations thus far, is that I did not get that committee assignment. But I am on the sub-appropriations committee for education. And, I just went through the other day DESE's budget. They came and presented it to us. It's 1,400 pages long. And it's program after program and expenditure after expenditure. And a lot of it is federal money. And you have to ask, should we be doing this? Not just should we spend this money, should we be doing this at all? And that's a question that doesn't get asked frequently enough.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring the Speaker of the House back up, because here's one thing that we had a problem with. There was a bill, it was HB 2009, and this was basically parents' choice, or medical freedom on parents. Basically, it said you could exclude, your kid from taking all the vaccines or certain vaccines. All you had to do was, it would have said that the Department of Health put up this form on the site that you could print off, fill it out, turn it into school, and that was it. End of story. And this was Susie Pollack's bill. Now, we have very good reason to believe, because it was admitted, that Plocker threatened people. Basically, maybe threaten's not the right word here. I wasn't there, so I can't say. But basically, they were kind of coerced into taking their names off the co-sponsorship. And then it got to the floor. It was amended by Rudy Veit. They gutted the bill. They destroyed it right there on the spot. And then once Susie Pollack found out about it, she's like, kill the bill.
Yeah.
Here is our problem. Nobody wanted to talk about it. You didn't have caucuses. Nobody said squat. We got the information, but nobody wanted to hold anybody accountable on actions like that. And I want to understand why They didn't hold him accountable, but I just I don't know. I don't understand why it happened and then everybody pretended it didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, again, that was before my time as well, and I wasn't there. But generically speaking, not about that bill, not about this speaker, or any of my current colleagues, but just generically, let me put my political science hat on for a second. So all bills, whether we like it or not, all bills are the result of many, 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 many compromises, because that's the only way you get a bill through. You're not going to get a pure bill that does anything through the process of the legislature in the General Assembly, not just the House, but the Senate as well, and then get the governor to sign it. Nobody's bill that actually accomplishes great, wonderful things gets all the way through without compromises. And so what ends up happening is you'll have a piece of legislation that you propose that you think is the answer to all problems. And from your perspective, there's not a thing in the world wrong with it because you wrote it. And it's your bill. No, why would you propose something that you thought was flawed? So you introduce the bill, and if it's really something that's going to change things for the better, there will be people who are against it simply because it's different. And if those people happen to be among leadership, you're going to have an extraordinarily difficult time getting that bill through in any format that even remotely resembles what you originally intended it to be. So when that's the case, the bill sponsor has to say, okay, which hill am I willing to die on and which ones am I not? And that's the beginning of the process. And, that particular bill, Susie saw the end of it and she said, this bill, as it's currently formatted, is not worth me having my name attached to it. And that's why she said, kill the bill. I've had somebody come. So I only have 2 bills that I filed so far. And the reason why I didn't pre-file and the reason why I only have 2 filed thus far is because when I file a bill and when I put my name on it, I want people to understand I've done absolutely everything I can do to make sure that that bill is in a format that accomplishes what I think ought to be accomplished and has already jumped through the hoops and answered every objection I can possibly conceive of before I put it on that filing, to try to eliminate some of this. So I have a bill that I'm working on. I go to people that I know and respect, and I say, I want you to tell me why this is a bad bill. You can't hurt my feelings, so just tell me why you think it's a bad bill. And then I take all the notes that they give me, and I go back and I rework it. Sometimes you can't make everybody happy. That's just the way it is. But if I can eliminate as many of those objections before I even file it, then 2 things have occurred. One, I've got the purest form of bill that I think can pass when I file it. But also, everybody I talk to, they feel like they're part of the process, and they have a little bit of ownership of that bill as well. They're much more likely to support it, even if they began the process thinking it was a bad idea. And so I think sometimes how we do things is just as important as that they be done. And the art of compromise and how it's done, when it's done, and when you absolutely positively cannot compromise, those are the hardest decisions that we make in Jefferson City.
Well, that's I'm happy that you laid your process out for me, because a lot of times we don't exactly hear those things. And I understand your point of view. I understand where you're coming from. It was still disheartening because the way it looks, the way the facts were presented, it was kind of it was almost, well, it wasn't almost, it was kind of fraudulent, and there was a lot of deceit there, where the way they made it sound on the floor, the way that bill was going to be amended, everybody seemed okay with it. But then when she saw the final product, she's like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
what's going on here? When did this get put in here?" So, because when Rudy Veit spoke on the floor, he flat out he was not truthful. That's the part that's getting people irritated. There was just a lot of BS spread around the joint on this bill, and when it was all said and done, she looked at it and went, "Yeah, like you said, I'm not attaching my name to this pile of crap."
Yeah. And again, I wasn't there, so it's hard for me to talk about that bill and that process. But I have heard people who were there say what happened to Susie was not right. Now, again, I wasn't there. I can't make that judgment. But I've been involved in politics for a very, very, very long time, both in academia but also at the municipal level. And City Hall is just as bad, And I built my career on never allowing an ordinance to go before the council until I knew for a fact that all of the due diligence was done and that I knew what those council members were most likely to do. I didn't take any shadow votes or anything like that. That's not ethical and it would be illegal. But I knew my council members. I knew who they were. I knew what they believed in. I knew where they stood. And if I didn't know for a fact what was going to happen, then that meant that ordinance was not yet ripe and we needed to do some more work before it was time to take it to the council. And I bring the same basic philosophy to my legislation efforts. And so I've got 4 or 5 bills I'm working on right now. They're not filed because they're not ready to be filed. A lot of people really scramble and try to pre-file bills, and they want them out there as quickly as they can, and they're filing 10, 12, 15 bills as fast as they can because they want to be able to show the folks back home how much they're working. If somebody wants a legislator to write a lot of bills, I'm not the guy that you want. I'm going to write a very, very few bills that have been through the process and come out as close to a finished product as I can possibly make it. They may not pass, but it's something that I'm proud to stand up and debate on, given the opportunity. And if it's got my name on it, you better believe I've got my ducks in a row, or else it never would have had my name attached in the first place.
Okay, fair. I appreciate that. I mean,
and I'm not saying Susie didn't do that.
Right.
Let me be clear about that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is what I do. This is how I approach it.
Sure.
And not everybody does.
Sure, because I again, her bill was extremely popular in the state last session. I mean, there was a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails to a lot of reps on this bill. There was a lot of activity surrounding this, and it just, again, it got demolished. And again, it looked deceitful and fraudulent. And, I know Susie took that to heart. It really hurt her to see what they did. And, it hurt us as well, because we put we put some effort into that bill to try to get it to the floor and get it to the Senate side and try to move it on. There was a lot of grassroots work done for that bill as well, along with what Susie did. But yeah, we've got to figure out who or what. Again, you can look up where the money, where they get their campaign donations from too. People that do behave this way on certain bills, if you look up where they're getting their campaign donations from, you can clearly see why sometimes they do what they do. Yeah. And, when you have somebody who's getting money from prosecuting attorney type types of associations and you present a bill about, you know, stand your ground enhancement, and that's not seeing the light of day, it's not hard to see why. They're getting money from somebody because the prosecuting attorneys wanted nothing to do. They didn't want this bill coming across their desk. And there was somebody that said, well, you know, it costs the state a lot of money to do, you know, X, Y, or Z, you know, and the guy's like, and you think people who defend themselves got all kinds of money? You know, the state has more resources than a citizen does. So to say that type of thing, like the state's got way more money to spend on stuff like that than the person who's defending themselves in court does, for the most part, not everybody's got millions of dollars to throw at an attorney to make sure that he doesn't go to jail for something that when he committed no crime.
Yeah.
And so that was a little ignorant to say too, like, really? Come on.
Even if the state had no monetary resources, and we know that it does, the state has all of the power. And so it's not a fair fight when the state has all of the power and all of the monetary resources. So I know an individual who's in jail for a crime right now that I believe he did not commit. And it's extraordinarily difficult for me, because of the system that we have, to see this individual potentially serve many, many years for something he did not do, and be powerless. And of course he says, well, you're elected now. Can't you reach out and help? And I said, yeah, I'm happy to talk to people and see what can be done. But let's be clear, there's separation of powers in our Constitution for a reason, and the legislature doesn't have that control, nor should it. But it's still very, very frustrating when someone who I believe is not guilty of the crime for which they are serving a sentence, it's hard to deal with. I know of a case where an individual who is mentally challenged. He was accused of a crime that he did not commit, and he was led down the garden path by an unethical cop. And that young man is going to spend the vast majority of his life in jail for something he didn't do. And if you had asked him if he was standing next to John Wilkes Booth, did he help assassinate Lincoln, he probably would have said yes to that too. There are cases like that. And those are the things that keep me up at night. It's not the budgets, crying out loud. I've dealt with numbers my entire career. It's not the budgets. It's not the aggravation from having to deal with legislators that don't know what they're talking about. It's not citizens that are upset based on some misinformation that they heard or saw a meme on Facebook. I don't sweat any of that. It's the flat out injustice that happens in our system on a continual basis. And not just here in Missouri, the entirety of the United States. I'm a law and order guy. I think bad people ought to pay for their crimes. And I have bills that are addressing those issues. But as strongly as I feel about making sure that the criminals are taken off the streets so that the society can be whole and safe, I'm just as passionate about individuals who've been unjustly prosecuted and convicted and serving sentences for things they didn't do. And it frustrates me to no end. It truly, truly does.
Okay, I got to ask this, but I can't think of the technical term. There's a term where police can kind of skate by, and you know, if they've done something wrong and you can't prosecute them. What the heck is the technical term? Because they're talking about taking some of it off the books in certain states, or this is going to aggravate me.
The immunity that they operate under.
Yes.
Yeah. So
what do you think about that? Because I think there should be some reform done on that. Qualified immunity, that's what it is.
Qualified immunity. So qualified immunity may need to be looked at and possibly tweaked. I'm not adverse to having that conversation. But I'm going to be straight up with you. I would not serve as a cop if there was not some form of qualified immunity. There's no way on God's green earth I would put on a gun and a badge if there wasn't some immunity. Now, if a cop does something that is clearly wrong clearly violates an individual's rights, liberties, freedoms, and does so in a way that is a violation under the color of law, there should be no qualified immunity. And that's why it's called qualified immunities, because they're not supposed to offer immunity for activities such as that. But a cop making an honest mistake based on the facts that were presented at the time. Should somebody's life be over financially, professionally, in every way that matters to a person who's trying to do a job, should their life be over because they made an honest mistake based upon the facts held at the time? I struggle with that. I do, because those guys and gals, for the vast majority of them, they're decent human beings who are just trying to help their community. Now, I've had some bad cops, and I've fired some cops. I've been sued over firing cops, and I have no problem firing bad cops. And here's the one thing I know for an absolute fact, and some of the listeners may think that I'm just absolutely crazy for saying this, but I know this is true. Nobody hates a bad cop worse than good cops. Nobody. And because it just makes their entire existence that much more difficult when someone's a bad cop. So can we look at it and see if maybe there's some tweaks to make it to be more righteous? Sure. But if there was no way for me to be able to act in good faith, honest, sincere good faith, and not have some immunity if there was an unforeseen mistake, there is no way in the world I'd be a cop, and there's no way I would encourage my son to be a cop under those circumstances.
It's it is one of those things. It is not an easy dilemma to solve, because here in the city here in the town that I live in, they were 2 cops down. It took them forever to find them. They went to the police academies, and the enrollment was down 50%. And again, there's a couple officers here in town. One that I know of for a fact who is outstanding. He understands his role, and he does not go into a situation and escalate it. He treats people like adults, not babies, things of that nature. Yeah. He understands his role. He takes it seriously, but he understands his role. Again, I think the public unions, like police unions, you get into teachers' unions, you get bad eggs, or you get bad apples, man. You get those rotten eggs. It's hard to toss them out, because the unions have made it almost nigh impossible. John Stossel put out a video a year or two ago, in New York. If you're a teacher accused of something, well, they put you in a room with the other teachers that are in there for bad behavior, still getting a paycheck, but they still have to come to school and sit in a classroom with the other bad apples for 8 hours a day, and then they go home, and they're still drawing a paycheck. Things like that make people, and it's the same way if it's a police officer, you're going to lose trust and faith. The other thing about being a cop is when you work in the city of St. Louis and you have a prosecutor like Kim Gardner.
Yeah.
Who somebody posted an article the other day where a woman fired shots out the window of her minivan towards an officer. The officer turned around. She chucked the gun out of the window, surrendered herself. They booked her, and then Gardner's like, cut her free. I mean, who wants to work in an environment like that, where if you're truly being a peace officer and you're fulfilling your role the way it's supposed to be, you're upholding constitutional law, and then you have a prosecutor that says, well, I don't know what her reasoning was, but she just cut her free. Who wants to work in an environment like that? So the problem, there's so many layers of problems in law enforcement. I don't know how you'd begin to break those down to even chisel away to solve some of the issues. Now, again, I'm with you. I think qualified immunity should be taken a hard look at. I also think we need to stop cities in areas that have chiefs of police instead of city marshals. So instead of an elected position, an appointed position, I think cities should fight that and say we want an elected marshal, not a chief of police, who are going to be beholden to us instead of the board of aldermen, the mayor, city manager, whoever. Things like that. And cops and sheriff's deputies that know and understand the Constitution, and that's a whole nother ball of wax.
It is. So let me play devil's advocate for just a second. So you have a city marshal who's elected by the people, or you can have a police chief who goes through the hiring process and is hired by the city manager or the board of aldermen. Ultimately, whichever format it is, ultimately the people elected the individuals who are in charge. If it's a direct election of city marshal, then it's 1 degree of separation from the voters. If it's a police chief hired under a city manager and under the board of aldermen, it's 3 degrees away from the voters. Neither system is inherently bad, but when you have voters that don't inform themselves, don't understand what's at stake, and you have a 15% turnout in the municipal election, we really have nobody but ourselves to blame for all that. And when the system, when either system goes bad, ultimately it's up to the voters to correct it. But we don't have real turnout. The difference between ignorance and apathy is I don't know and I don't care, right? And so when we have municipal and county elections that nobody bothers to show up for, it's frustrating, but it's the fault of the community that it is the way that it is. Kim Gardner couldn't be doing anything if she weren't reelected. But what are the odds of that given the given? And so I'm not advocating for one system over the other. I'm just saying that whichever system you have, if you're not happy with it and you had a 13% turnout last time, and let's be clear, that's, you have roughly half the people who are eligible to vote, only half of them are registered. So when you say 13% or 15% of voter turnout, that's a percentage of registered voters. It's actually half of that of people who could have voted and just haven't bothered to do so. And so you've got situations where you've got 5, 6, 7% of the population making all of the decisions, and that's the tiniest of minorities. If people got involved, educated themselves, and actually showed up at the polls, who knows how different a system we might actually have to work with.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that because that is a point that I brought up a lot of times. We love to say although it's true that a lot of politicians and a lot of parts of government suck, because they do. But at the end of the day, we have to look in the mirror.
Yep.
And this is why I'm happy I did the experiment I did and went from a podcast on more federal and national issues to state issues and getting more involved in the state and trying to, break the chains away, making the state as free as possible, because it's on a more local level. You have more control. Of course, you go to city, county, you have even more control. But if you don't get involved, you can't expect a few grassroots movements to do everything for you, because there's just not enough time in the day. There's not enough people and not enough hours in a day to sit here and make your world the way you want it to be. So it's time for a lot of people to get off their duff and get involved. And yeah, that means going and voting in April in your local area. on either ballot issues, tax increases, alderman, mayor, any elected official elections, and get involved. Find out who these people are, what they stand for, and make your choice. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow because too many people blindly follow a party and not the principle. And
Yeah.
that's a big mistake because we've seen a lot of elected officials pick party over principle all day long, day after day. And
Well, the way I describe it is, and have for years, is that politics is kind of like an NFL football game. You've got 22 people desperately in need of rest being watched by 60,000 desperately in need of exercise. And that's kind of what our voting is like. I want more participation in voting, but I want it to be educated. I want it to be intelligent, well thought out, principled participation. If people are just going to go in there and blindly follow this party or that party, or they saw a meme on Facebook and that's how they're going to cast their vote, maybe you should just stay home. But if we'll get involved, if we'll get educated, if we'll get to where we actually know what in the world we're talking about, then get out and vote. We can take this country back from the city all the way up to the national government. We can absolutely do that. We have the power. The problem is we just don't use it, and it's our fault.
yeah, very well said. Well, Darin, is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation before we end the show here?
No, listen, I really appreciate you having me on, John. I'd love to be on again on any other time that you'd like. I'm glad Tom put us together, and I just really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak about these things, and I've enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, I have too. I appreciate your honesty. Again, you're not going to see eye to eye 100% of the time with somebody, but I appreciate when somebody comes on and gives me their honest take on a situation. And maybe my next trip up to the Capitol, I'll swing by your office, see if you're in, and stop and chat with you face to face, because that's a good thing about this show that some of the people that I've interviewed, I've got to actually, when we go up to the Capitol, I actually got to stand and chat or stand and chat with them for a few minutes, and because I always do this by phone, it's nice to actually talk to them face to face. So yeah, I'll tell you this, Darin. If something comes up, a bill that you think is really important, something that you want people to know about, something you're very passionate about, and you want to talk about it, you've got my number. Send me a text, and I'll get you scheduled on to come on and talk about it.
That sounds great. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, you have a great weekend, Darin, and best of luck to you in this legislative session, sir.
Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, Darin Chappell, everybody, again. Not really a bad guy. Again, I'm not going to see eye to eye on him on everything, but I do appreciate his candor, because how many times do politicians get on the radio or whatever and kind of, just kind of have these canned little responses and not. So I appreciate his honesty on everything that we talked about this evening. So yeah, meet and greet on Sunday in Eureka. Gary Wright has put together a meet and greet for the Missouri Freedom Initiative. I'll be there. Patrick will be there. And, of course, Gary will be there, because if Gary wasn't there, it'd be super weird. It'd be really, really weird. So I'm going to bring a few cups. I had somebody basically make vinyl decals that are waterproof, that I basically applied to a cup like this. It's a thing that my wife designed. I'm going to have a few of those that I'm going to try to sell. And then I've still got, I'm going to give a couple away as well. And I'm probably going to do that next week. Once I have them all done, then I will give away two. I'm going to try to sell the rest of them over the next few events. I'm only going to charge. They're 32 ounces, so they're this size, good size. I'm only selling for $15. But I am going to give a couple away as well. So again, folks, got a lot of good interviews set up. Again, Ethan Thampy's going to be back with me. Bill Eigel's L.A. Sherry is going to join me at the end of next month. Going to have Cherie Tolson Reich, Maisie Boyd, Tony Lavasco. I'm going to try to get Robert Brown back on in the middle of March to continue our discussion of the Federalist Papers and the power of nullification. I am also going to try to find, anybody out there, Tom, Patrick, anybody that knows of somebody who's maybe written a book or has done extensive studies on jury nullification. I want to get a person like that on the show because we talk about nullifying as far as states nullifying, laws that are repugnant to the Constitution. I would also love to have the discussion from someone who's maybe got some case history or some great examples on a single person in a jury having the power to nullify a law they see as immoral or repugnant to the Constitution, what have you, during a trial. So I want to bring up and I want to discuss jury nullification too as another powerful tool that the people can use in their lives. So if anybody knows of one, text me, email me, however you got to do it. I definitely, put it in the chat. However you want to do it. Oh, Tom Martz is nominated. Tom, are you still with us, buddy? Because if you are, I got to have you back on to talk about jury nullification. If you know a lot about it, I'll have you on, and we'll make it a topic of discussion for an entire show. But we talk about nullification in the legislation. Luke Von Trapp. I will look him up. Thank you, Tom. But we talk about it at a state level, and I want to talk about it on a very personal level, and that is, person, just a single human being in a courtroom, changing the course of someone's life with jury nullification. So I will look up Luke Von Trapp and see if I can get a hold of him and get something scheduled with him as well. With that being said, don't forget tomorrow night, 7:30 on Odyssey. If you look at the description of this YouTube video, you will find the link to the Missouri Freedom Initiative's Odyssey channel. Saturday nights at 7:30 p.m. Central Time. Also, don't forget, and also before that, don't forget to go to mofree.org and sign up for their email list so you can stay up to date on legislation and things that are happening in our state of Missouri here. But also don't forget MOLibertyRadio.us. That's MOLibertyRadio.us, especially on Sunday nights from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time. Sam and Trish Britton, Off the Cuff Radio. I'm telling you, you're not going to regret if you listen in on that show. You are going to be informed. So Sam and Trish always do a great job every week with the news behind the news, and that's how they their old intro to their show, their old show. I can't even remember what that old show was called. Oh, the Information Corner. Yes, the Information Corner. And they had an intro, and it's like the news behind the news. Well, they still do that. It's a different show name, off the cuff, but still the news behind the news. So, again, don't forget to check that out. And with that, let me get my volume up here. We'll see you all next week with Patrick Holland from the Missouri Freedom Initiative and another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe. We'll see you next Friday.
Want more freedom? It starts with you. Join us next week on the Missouri Liberty Report and find out how you can get involved to take back your state.
All right, thanks everybody for joining me again. Appreciate all the comments and questions and all that. As usual, you guys are on fire, all fired up. And I look forward to seeing Gary and Patrick and maybe some of you others at Gary's event in Eureka. I will be there. I will be emceeing the event, and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to wear a suit jacket and a tie, or if I'm just going to go with the old patented John Williams bow tie. Don't know, but I'll make up my mind Saturday night. And I have a speech prepared. I added a little bit to it, a few more sentences to just round it off to get my general point across. And this is the first time I've written a speech. It's short. It'll only be a couple minutes, but, you know, it is what it is. I decided to do that as an opener, and that way I didn't go off topic. You know, print it out, read it, it's good, and go from there. John Grady says bow tie. Yeah, I think I'm going to go bow tie. I think that's going to be my calling card when I go to events or to the Capitol. Bow tie for sure. But anyway, folks, again, grateful for all of you, everybody that likes, sends out the likes, all the comments and questions and all that. I really appreciate that you guys jump in here and participate, and I'm not sitting here talking to an empty live chat room. So anyway, yeah, my hopefully as long schedule permitting, definitely want to go to another prepared homestead meeting in February. Again, if I don't have anything on my calendar, then yeah, I will be doing that. Also, kind of a heads up, I'm looking at probably April. I think that's the month I'm going to try to nail down. I'm going to try to have Michelle Latham up here in Owensville to talk about the WEF hub in Cape Girardeau. I'm trying to figure out a date for that so I can get it set in stone, so I can give her that date where I give her plenty of time to, make sure that she's able to do it. And then I will also invite state senator, state rep, and anybody else, Patrick, Tom, anybody else that wants to show up and have another good meeting here locally, and hopefully get even more people to show up than last time. That's what I'm hoping for. So anyway, have a great weekend, everybody, and hope to see you, some of you on Sunday.